Progress.
Welcome to the second of two public interviews for the position of Superintendent of Boston Public Schools, hosted by the Boston School Committee. I'm Jerry Robinson, Chair of the Boston School Committee. We are offering interpretation today in the 9 BPS languages. The interpretation feature has been turned on. Please note that everyone needs to join a channel, including English speakers. If you want to listen to the conversation in English, please join the English channel by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. To support our American Sign Language interpreters, please name yourself before speaking. Participants, please note that if you would like to have the ASL interpreter box larger, you can pin this panelist by clicking on the 3 buttons in the top right of that box and selecting Pin. Today's meeting is being recorded to serve as a resource for school committee members and to make available for those who cannot be here today. The Superintendent Search Committee was tasked by the school committee to conduct a thorough search for our next leader. Beginning in March, they began by hosting a series of public listening sessions and community stakeholder meetings. The feedback voiced by students, families, educators, and other community partners was incorporated into the superintendent's job description and informed the search committee members' interview questions. Beginning with 34 candidates, the search committee narrowed the pool to 8 candidates throughout May and June and conducted several rounds of interviews with the candidates. On June 17, the search committee conducted its final deliberations and voted to select a group of finalists for the school committee's consideration. 2 candidates have since withdrawn from the process prior to the start of the public interviews. The 2 final candidates are Mary Skipper, Superintendent of Somerville Public Schools, and Dr. Tommy Welch, Region 1 School Superintendent at Boston Public Schools. Today's interview is with Dr. Tommy Welch. A little bit about today's agenda. We'll begin today's interview with an opening statement from the candidate. Each committee member has prepared 2 rounds of questions. The candidate will then have an opportunity to ask questions of the school committee. We'll wrap up by inviting the candidate to provide a closing statement. Let's get right to it. Today, we're delighted to have with us finalist Dr. Tommy Welch. I will now invite Dr. Welch to give a brief opening statement.
Good afternoon and thank you. Buenos tardes y gracias. Y prometo, señora Polanco Garcia y los intérpretes, que yo voy a hablar despacito, okay? I first want to express my gratitude to the Superintendent Search Committee for their hard work, their long hours, and their faith in my ability to potentially be named the next leader of the Boston Public Schools. I'm extremely humbled and honored to be sitting in this chair tonight in the final stage, in the final hours of the public interview process. So thank you. When I first began truly thinking about applying to lead the Boston Public Schools, I reviewed the job description closely. As much as I wanted to be the next superintendent, I needed to be sure that I was the right person to lead BPS now. Based on the community input and the challenges of the district today, I believe I am the leader we need. I've experienced leading large urban school districts and networks of teams in urban school districts. I am multiracial. I'm a bilingual educator who taught English as a second language, and I continue to develop my Spanish language skills as a second language. I'm a parent of 2 Boston Public School students attending our neighborhood school. I was a national board certified teacher in the area of early childhood education and English as a new language. I've opened new schools. I've served as a middle school principal. I've served as a high school principal. I've taught and led in the alternative education setting. I earned my master's degree in education from UCLA, as well as a doctorate in educational leadership from Boston College. I've written policies that have positively impacted the lives of traditionally marginalized student populations. And most importantly, I'm currently a systems-level regional school superintendent, supporting over 7,000 students, 700 educators, 15 schools in 3 neighborhoods in the city of Boston, which is larger than about 95% of the school districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Several of the aforementioned qualities and characteristics will be a first for Boston Public Schools if I am selected as this organization's leader. And I promise I will only be the first of many who will bring this local brand of leadership and experience to the role of superintendent in the decades ahead. In the past, I've rolled up my sleeves to dramatically impact the graduation rates in an underserved community of Los Angeles, doubling historic graduation rates for Black, Latinx, students with disabilities, and multilingual learners, with 89.5% of the cohort of students I started with in 6th grade as a principal graduating from our high school. 89.5%. In Boston, I'm currently working with my team of school leaders to direct the once-in-a-generation ESSER funding to impact the learning experiences of the most vulnerable student populations in our region, offering extended learning time and additional support staff for students who are most impacted by the challenges of the twin pandemics. Taking on the challenges of the pandemics and the systemic racism is not easy work, but I am fortunate to make a difference every day in schools with dedicated colleagues. I have spent 23 years in public education in both Los Angeles and Boston, and as I've worked my way to greater responsibilities, I began to see the superintendent position as a possibility, but not any superintendency. It would have to be the leadership role in the city to which I am emotionally and physically connected to. Boston is that city. Boston is our home. BPS is our home, where both my wife and I have dedicated our careers and entrusted our children. This is the only place that I would do the job, and that's why I'm here today. There are urgent challenges facing the BPS, and I'm prepared to lead our great district on the first day of the 22-23 school year, which is next Friday, July 1st. I'm available and I'm ready. This is my opening statement, but if you have any questions about my leadership, you do not have to just ask me. My success is really a community success, the result of vision, leading teams, and collaboration. Please ask any of the BPS stakeholders who've worked with me: teachers, parents, caregivers, school leaders who are the backbone of my team's success, central office teammates who've led side by side with me, community-based organizations, philanthropic foundations, local elected officials, university partners, members of the faith-based community, and most importantly, our students. And lastly, ask yourselves, this team here, many of you as school committee members have walked schools with me. I remember the joy and the learning you observed with me. Remember the impressive student work and the student achievement, the engaged families, the supported educators, our dedicated cafeteria workers and custodians. With collaboration, support, and a great team, we can bring this to every single Boston public school. Ask anyone and they will tell you that I build relationships and trust, and I get things done. I'm a doer, and I'm an implementer. And I'm excited for the opportunity to do this for all of BPS, to reach its potential as a district that truly provides equitable access and positive outcomes for all its children. Thank you for this opportunity for an opening statement.
Thank you. At this time, I'll invite Dr. Alkins to kick us off with the first question.
So in line with being a doer, being an implementer, so in understanding sort of the looming legacy of systemic racism, anti-Blackness, but racism in particularly that affects all particularly marginalized groups. We've seen, particularly with regard to Black student achievement, a lack of progress there. And I'm very curious as to what strategies you intend to implement and how you're going to measure that progress as we move forward. So not just for students, but then also looking at it at the central office level, how policies are affecting our central office. And I'll let you start there.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dr. Hawkins. You used the term anti-Blackness, and I think that is the next level of engagement that we need to address, not even just in our central office, but across the entire system. We've built the work of equity on the shoulders of team members from people before that I was even here, right? I think we had a very strong growth of the team members in central office who supported our school leaders. They supported me as a regional school superintendent as I led professional development for my network of schools. This was about 2015, 16, 17. That work has continued. I think that this next chapter, in addition to what happened over the last several years with this investments, is addressing some of the things that are still pain points for our communities. I said in one of our listening sessions or our community panels earlier, if our schools are not good enough for our Black students, it's not good enough for anybody. If our schools are not welcoming and supportive for our Black families, they're not good enough for everyone. And so I think addressing this head on and really talking about it and ensuring that it hits every single part of our district, and using people like me in my current role who support anywhere from 10 to 15 schools as that person who can talk to the school leader to see where they're at with that, what challenges are popping up, how we are tracking it. Because if we don't talk about it and we don't put it in writing and we don't use it in our data growth as we look periodic as far as our goals, we're never going to continue, we're never going to start addressing the issues, and we're never going to continue any growth that we have seen in some of our schools.
Okay. Ms. Lopera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you, Dr. Welch. And the SH and the CH are really hard for me, so apologies
Okay.
how often I will mess that up. El lenguaje más hablado en nuestro distrito, fuera de inglés, es el español. Y por lo tanto, empezaré esta pregunta en particular en español. Me gustaría saber qué ha hecho para crear asociaciones positivas con estudiantes, familias y miembros de la comunidad que hablan otro idioma. ¿Qué estrategias utilizó? ¿Qué programas ha desarrollado? And that's another word in Spanish that gets me. Desarrollado. Y por favor provee ejemplos específicos de cómo trabaja con comunidades de culturas y lenguajes diversos para incluir y empoderar a todos en el sistema educativo. También describa cómo sabe que funcionó, cómo eran las asociaciones antes de su trabajo y después.
Gracias por su pregunta. Voy a tratar a responder en español. En todos mis años trabajando en Los Ángeles, yo estaba en un vecindario que está casi 95% familias de México y de Centroamérica. El primer idioma estaba español, todavía está español. Todo mi equipo, casi 90% de mi equipo está bilingüe. Yo soy un líder afuera de la comunidad, pero yo tengo un equipo que está creciendo en el vecindario. Hay muchos programas que yo enseñé para apoyar a las familias que hablan español y también para los estudiantes. Pero yo quiero explicar el ejemplo. Yo quiero compartir un gran ejemplo de un programa que yo desarrollar para cambiar la vida de mis estudiantes. Okay? Mi primera posición como director era en un middle school, en secundaria. Y en los 3 años después abrimos, los padres, los estudiantes, los miembros de la comunidad le gusta mucho que estamos haciendo en la escuela, completamente diferente de la historia de los otros secundarios en la área. So, un día, los padres fue a mi oficina y preguntó, queremos abrir un nuevo preparatoria. ¿Cómo así? Queremos abrir, como es muy fácil. Pero el tiempo de esta pregunta estaba perfecto, porque es en el mismo periodo de las aplicaciones para nuevas escuelas. Y esa escuela que está, la secundaria, es un nuevo edificio, como este edificio aquí. Pero tuvimos espacio en una escuela bien viejo, pero tenemos espacio. So yo pregunté a ellos si la grupo de padres quieren planear para una aplicación para una nueva escuela, pueden usar mi plan original, pero necesitan trabajar ustedes. Yo voy a apoyar, pero necesitan su voz, sus ideas y su esfuerzo. Tuvimos como 20 juntas comunitarias con las familias y presentó la comité de escuelas y ganó la escuela. Pero preguntemos, no solamente para abrir como un preparatorio completa, solamente con noveno grado, porque ellos quieren crecer el mismo programa que tenemos en la secundaria. Esa es una historia, a mí no es un programa pequeño, a mí es un programa grande, porque todo el trabajo que hicimos en la secundaria siguen a la preparatoria, incluido los programas de inclusión, de educación especial, porque si tenemos una escuela de 95% de estudiantes que están Latinx, casi la mayoría de nuestros estudiantes en educación especial están de Latinx también. Pero seguimos todos estos programas, los programas que desarrollamos en la escuela, en la secundaria, hasta la preparatoria. Y esa es una historia que yo soy muy orgulloso de esta historia. Si usan Google, ponen Google Nueva Escuela Nava, la escuela se llama Nava. La historia es la primera que brincan en su search engine. I don't think I answered the rest of the question, but can I catch up right there?
Yes. Do you mind if first of all, thank you. Muchas gracias. Do you mind if I translate for folks the question in English?
Yeah, and then I can answer in English?
Oh, of course.
The first part?
Yes, that'd be great. The language that is most spoken in our district other than English is Spanish. For that reason, I'm going to start by asking this particular question in English, and I didn't expect a response, but thank you. I would like to know what you have done to create positive partnerships with students, families, and community members who speak a language other than English. What strategies have you used? What programmatic offerings have you developed? And please provide specific examples of how you engage with communities of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds to include and empower everyone in our educational system. And most importantly, how did you know it worked? What was it like before you implemented this strategy, and what did it look like after?
Okay, so I'll respond in English. I think I forgot in my Spanish response the strategies, but I'll work the strategies into this response. And then how did I know it worked? I'll give you some data. I think I said it already in the opening, but that's the data I'll share. So as I was saying in my Spanish response, my first leadership opportunity as a principal was at a brand new middle school in South Central Los Angeles. It was at a time when we were building dozens of schools a year. Like, we literally used $25 billion in bond money to build over 135 schools. One of those schools was in the backyard of the high school that I was currently working at. I formed a team of teachers to basically apply for the school, and we got it. But that's not the success story. I mean, it was a great success. But the story is, after 3 years of being at the middle school, and this middle school was built to relieve the second lowest performing middle school in Los Angeles. And we opened with 1,000 students, 1,030 students. And it was hard the first couple years. But that sixth grade class, that's the one that was, their middle school experience was just us. And so we served all of our students, but as that sixth grade class grew to seventh, and then to eighth grade, this was a class that only knew middle school and secondary school as us. And the parents, they've been in the neighborhood, forever, and they realized that the kids were getting something different. And so very early in that third year, one of my parents, Maria Melendres, she walked in with some of her friends and said, yeah, hey, we love what you're doing. We want you to create high school in the school. Like, let's just keep growing in the school. But the thing is, there's no space in the school, right? It's a full middle school with 1,000 students. And we had a co-located charter school with 500. And so I said, if you really want to do this, we could apply through the same process we did 4 years earlier. But it won't be a brand new school like this, because brand new schools were opening space in the older schools. There was a school 2 blocks away at that school I was working at. And I said, we can go after it, but you can use my plan. I will work with you parents to help guide you through this process, to schedule meetings, but it needs to be your voice, your story, and your effort. The timing was perfect. There were several meetings throughout that fall and winter. We got the parents and some of our teachers, so some of our teachers took responsibility. And one of the teachers is actually the principal of that high school right now. We got the school. We were presented to the school board, they call it school board in Los Angeles. And it was like, wow, we did it. Parents from the neighborhood, almost 95% immigrant families, second and first generation, got a school. One of the successes is not just the success of doing that, but all the programs that we established in the middle school, like inclusion for English language learners. We had full inclusion. We took away sub-separate, did full inclusion model. We grew it up. Whatever we were doing in 8th grade, we rolled it up to 9th grade. But the success was, it was the parents who were the voice of it. They were the motivators behind it. They were doing it for their kids. I mentioned in Spanish, if you just Google New School in Nava, the school is called Nava, you will hear the story. And I mean, it's almost accurate. There's one number that's inaccurate. It said I had 19 years of experience. It was only 15 years at that time. But it tells the story of how the students were, the teachers were not, the parents were empowered to do this work. So it gets around your kind of question about how we developed programs to support English language, but it did, because the entire population were people who did not speak English. Well, 5% of our population were African-American students. So it was a success story for the population of South Central Los Angeles.
Thank you. Because I asked our other candidate this yesterday, one of the pieces that we've talked about at Boston Public Schools is moving the district into really ensuring native language access. And so, especially for multilingual learners and multilingual learners with disabilities. And so that is the official policy of BPS, but I would like to hear from you, one, if you're committed to operationalizing this policy, and two, how would you expand services for multilingual learners, specifically around native language instruction? If you could provide any data to help frame that, that would be.
Yeah, data I'd have to really think about, but as far as operationalizing and thinking about other goals that we have within our strategic plan in our district through 2025, providing additional support, language support for all of our students, not just Spanish speakers, but the major languages, the 9 major languages of our district. I think we have an opportunity with the Look Act coming into law that allows us to provide these native language supports in the classroom. Now, ideally, we would find a teacher who is proficient, bilingual, biliterate in Cape Verdean and Haitian Creole and Spanish. We know that these folks are hard to find. Our Vietnamese program that just got started at the Mather, it is, if we're gonna grow up a program, you know, we have the teachers right now, but every year we need to add another teacher who's not only can speak Vietnamese, but can speak Vietnamese and teach it and do it proficiently. And so one of the ideas I'm thinking about to operationalize is really tap into this whole pipeline development program that Rashawn Martin and Saren Daly are working with to attract not only teachers, but paraprofessionals who are proficient in language to be that extra support in the classroom for our language learners, with the double goal of putting them on a pathway to eventually licensure that will help expand what we're doing in all our schools. So imagine if we were able to formalize and operationalize that. It's not a strategy that's gonna give us certified bilingual, biliterate teachers tomorrow, but eventually will. And if we step back one step further and look at the work of Wences Raphael in the same office, who's doing our teacher cadet program, it takes a long time to get there, but if we get students who are interested, who are willing to come back, give them early contracts as paraprofessionals or teachers, we're gonna develop this workforce that we know we're gonna be experiencing shortfalls in years to come.
Muchas gracias.
De nada.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Muchas gracias por su introducción. El lenguaje nativo es algo que me toca mucho de manera particular porque soy una inmigrante de República Dominicana y poder mantener la cultura de nuestros niños bien identificadas es bien importante porque muchas veces se pierde y tenemos niños que llegan y tienen los abuelitos y tienen la mamá que no hablan inglés y la alfabetización en su idioma nativo es bien importante.
So thank you so much for your introduction. It's very important, to maintain the native languages. I myself am from the Dominican Republic. I do believe that maintaining our culture give us a great sense of who we are. So this is why maintaining our language maintains our connection. If we have in our families kids that want to communicate with aunts, great aunts, grandparents, and they don't speak the language, how are we going to maintain the language and the culture? So it is very important that we strive to do it.
Durante muchos años, BPS se vio obligado a operar en un estado de enmienda que exigía la inmersión en inglés. Hace 4 años, después de una lucha fuerte de los padres, el Estado aprobó la ley Luke, que nuevamente brindó la oportunidad de usar el idioma nativo en la educación de los estudiantes de inglés multilingüe.
For many years, BPS was forced to operate in an amendment state that required English immersion. 4 years ago, with hard work from the parents, the state passed the Look Act, which again provided the opportunity to use the native language in the education of English learners multilinguals.
Me gustaría saber cuál es su filosofía y compromiso para brindar acceso al idioma nativo y la alfabetización en el idioma nativo. En su respuesta, describa también los programas de aprendices del idioma inglés que ha supervisado y cualquier experiencia que haya tenido en cambiar un sistema escolar de un enfoque a otro.
Okay.
What is your philosophy and commitment to providing native language access to native language literacy? In your response, please also describe any English learners programs you have supervised and any experience you've had in changing a school system from one focus to another.
Okay. So primero, un comentario en su primera parte de nuestra pregunta para que explica la importancia para mantener su cultura. Ese no es un problema solamente en Boston. Cuando yo estaba un maestro 20 años atrás, yo experiencié la misma situación. Yo enseñé primer, segundo, tercer grado, y eso es cuando los estudiantes están más confortables hablando en inglés. Y muchos de los padres están frustrados porque los estudiantes que ya tienen un poquito de inglés en segundo o tercer grado están hablando puro en inglés, están mirando la televisión, las películas en puro inglés, y sienten mal los padres que no tienen el idioma, so está como deconstruyendo la fábrica de la familia. Y yo siempre dije a los estudiantes, es muy importante mantener su idioma y su cultura. La idioma es más fácil, la cultura, porque ellos están en Estados Unidos, un poquito diferente, pero yo vi los estudiantes crecer al elemental, porque yo trabajé en la secundaria y también en la preparatoria. En este último año que yo estaba en Los Ángeles es cuando empezamos la SEAL de Biliteracy, nuestra versión en Los Ángeles, pero muy pocos estudiantes toman ventaja de este bueno programa. En otro punto, ahorita mi esposa, su familia es de Guatemala, ella trabaja en una preparatoria aquí, ella trabaja con una family liaison. Y ella, yo escuché a ella siempre en el teléfono en la noche cuando está hablando los padres, los estudiantes. Ustedes tienen mucho talento, están muy talentosos porque ya tienen 2 idiomas. Y ella explica, ella tiene su trabajo hoy solamente porque ella puede hablar 2 idiomas. So, es muy importante a tener los 2 cuando salir de nuestra escuela, pero ¿cómo están apoyando a los estudiantes durante? Esa es su pregunta. El cambio de un programa al otro es muy difícil para un sistema muy grande. Yo vi los cambios en las escuelas, en las clases que están tomando advantaje de esta nueva ley. Pero para mover el sistema necesitan ver las escuelas que tienen la experiencia buena con este cambio. Por ejemplo, en mi Region 1, de Humana, es una escuela de los 2 idiomas, Dual Language, que creció el programa. Kinder a primer grado cuando yo llegué aquí, en cada año cambio el programa SCI a Dual Language, 1 grado cada año. El próximo año es el primer año que ya tiene Kinder hasta 8º grado. Es muy difícil porque hay gente que trabaja en las posiciones para apoyar SCI y hay diferentes licencias y diferentes capacidades que los maestros necesitan para enseñar en su lenguaje nativo, pero podemos hacerlo. Y yo quiero trabajar con nuestro departamento de Multilingual Learners para crecer y también para apoyar la otra respuesta que yo di, para traer paraprofessionals y maestros para apoyar. Necesitan buscar y traer maestros y paraprofessionals aquí en nuestra escuela para ayudarnos. ¿Mi respuesta está bien?
Sí.
Okay, can I do it in English now?
Yeah, in English.
Sorry for the timing. Basically, I was saying I experienced the same thing as a teacher in Los Angeles. Rafael was explaining that at times parents are frustrated because the students are learning English and they're losing their culture. I was explaining how it's really important to make sure that we not only the language but asking how we're making sure our students are maintaining their culture, working with the parents, because a lot of times the parents feel alienated when their students are learning English in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and all of a sudden they prefer watching TV in English, talking to their friends in English, and the parents can't even talk to their kids at home. And so one of the things we've always talked when I was a teacher was like, you got to maintain your both languages because it's an advantage. I told the story of my wife. She works as a family liaison at a high school, and I always hear her on the phone talking to students and parents saying, yeah, you are learning English right now. It is a struggle, but as soon as we graduate with 2 languages, you have an advantage on every other classmate that you have. I hear her say all the time, I have this job because I speak 2 languages. I know she's a brilliant woman and she's a strong woman, she's college age, but she says, this is how I got this job. And so going to the real question was, how are we going to transition some of our SCI programs based on the new Look Act that was signed, not new anymore, but 4 years ago. And what I explained was how we look at some of the schools that have done this transition. And in my experience, I think that was the question, what have we done? When I got here in 2015, the Mario Humana school just started being a dual language school. It had kindergarten and 1st grade. And every year we grew it 1 grade. And every year it caused disruption with the staff because when you switch to a dual language model, the teachers need different licensure and they need to be proficient and biliterate in the language of the target, so in this case Spanish. It is very disruptive if you do not plan ahead. And I also highlighted something from the earlier response from Lorena, thinking about how we bring these people in strategically. We can bring first language, primary language support in the classroom if it looks like, if we could get people in the door who are bilingual in whatever language we need as a paraprofessional, and again, train them to become a teacher over here. If we pay for their licensure, we keep them, we maintain them, they're committed to us, and at the end of the day, we'll have more teachers to help support our students across the district.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Trine?
Yes. Well, I do agree one thing. It's time to effectively and consistently implementing the Look Act.
Yes.
It's really the time. But this is my question. I think you heard my question the last time I interviewed the previous superintendent. So here it is. Notwithstanding the textbook definition of equity, we each have our own interpretation of equity. As you can tell in most of our public hearings, the term equity, I don't know whether the person understands it thoroughly or not, but the term equity has been used either as a defensive rationale or an offensive rationale in supporting or opposing certain program or project of the school. We heard that all the time. Mm-hmm. My question is, what is your own definition of equity in applying to your policy as well as your project, your initiatives? And when you are facing with a situation where there is a diametrically opposed rationale on that term or on that reason, how do you deal with it?
Thank you for the question. My definition of equity is very aligned with our district's vision, which is getting every student what they need to succeed. I would extend it beyond based on their needs, but also their strengths and their experiences. Equity is a priority in my doctoral research, in my life, and my work that I do with the regions of schools. As I did my research in equity, I actually referenced the 2016 Opportunity Gaps policy. My definition, the way I view equity in schools and outside of schools, is very closely aligned to the policy that this body adopted in 2016. But for my research, and I did my research on succession planning in urban school districts through the lens of equity, so it's kind of relevant. There are 5 key elements of equity as I approach it in my work. And all of these elements, there's no hierarchy. They all work together at different times. You know, maybe some of them are more prioritized than others. But the first one is looking at equity as outcomes. What are we doing for our students to ensure that the goals that we have in place and we are delivering it into our students in the classroom, be it something as big as the Mass Core policy that we just passed, which is a tremendous accomplishment for our students. Are we delivering on that outcome of graduating every single student with the Mass Core graduation requirements? You could take it back to where my daughter is right now. We always say, we want our students to be reading by 3rd grade because we know the school to prison pipeline starts with students who are, why can't we say the outcome we want is all students reading by 2nd grade and build off of that? And then you go to my son who's in kindergarten, he's a K2 student. We could look at the outcome of ensuring that every single student gets what they need to exit kindergarten with basic numeracy and able to decode, which is the very first steps of reading. That is a version of equity as far as outcomes. So the first one is outcomes. The second pillar or element of equity that I have uncovered in my research is equity as opportunity. This is almost exactly aligned with our definition of equity in the district. But what opportunities are we providing all of our students across the district to get what they need? And as I mentioned, not just based on their needs, but on their strengths and their experiences. The third element is equity as a commitment. And this is probably the one, I think this is your second question, it's the most important to that. How are we as a body here in this room, the executive team, every single central office support team member, every single principal, how are we committed to equity every single day, despite the risks and the adversity that we face? How are we talking about it? How are we acting it? That's going to show our commitment to what we are saying we're doing. The fourth element of equity that I uncovered in my research is equity as affirmation. And in the classroom, we call it like looking at our students, approaching the asset base. Like all of our students bring something to the table that we can build upon. But in the adult context, affirmation of different ideas, people who have different experience as we plan different initiatives. And we talked about the Look Act. There's many ways we could approach this, but we have to start doing it and implementing it so it gets in our schools. There's not one voice at the table. We have to respect and understand that different perspectives can get us what we want if we work together. And the last one, which is something I think we do approach in the system, that it hasn't, in our school district, but it hasn't really been called out, is equity of systems. And that's how we look at the new version of weighted student formula that we're working on right now, our enrollment strategies, even things like programming for acceleration academies. How are we systematically approaching the work of equity to serve our students who need it the most at first? And if you put all that together, it's not, I mentioned it's not a hierarchy. It's more like, if you can imagine like a system of gears, right? You got all these gears all around. And depending on the situation, right? Maybe sometimes the commitment needs to be a little bit more forced because people aren't hearing what you're doing. That, in the system of gears, maybe that's a bigger gear at that time. Maybe we need to work really quickly to get the Look Act work out because it's been sitting there for a while and we've been working on the edges. Maybe that's the speed. We need a smaller gear that goes faster. But at the end of the day, if we're clear with that definition, like you had said, Kwak, everyone needs to understand we are going in the same direction. And then this metaphor of gears, we're all turning, sometimes exerting more force, more speed, but still all working together in the same direction as a team, as an organization for the students who need it most.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have two committee members who are unable to be with us tonight, but I will be asking questions on their behalf. The first one is from member Brandon Cardet Hernandez, and his question reads, currently we are operating a two-tier special education system lacking the diverse portfolio of programming opportunities that students with disabilities need and deserve. Our individualized ed plans struggle to truly individualize programming because of our vast service delivery deficits. Can you give hard evidence around your work in special education reform and disability justice? How have you innovated around these urgent issues in the past? How have you transformed outcomes for students with disabilities and ELL students with disabilities? And what data would you point to when describing your policy work and, more importantly, the outcomes for kids and families?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Member Brandon. I think the closest example of the work, I'd go back to when I was a principal as well. This is when I was closely working, and I mentioned this briefly in the example that I provided in my response to Member Lepera's question. But to take a school, a large school, 1,000 students, 1,030 students, and within 1 year, completely dismantle your sub-separate program. And we didn't have like 20 different programs. We had, I think, 3 or 4 different unique programs of sub-separate. And to go from 1 year to the next and have inclusion model co-teaching, I mean, it's a tremendous feat. And it just doesn't happen over the summer. You have to get the buy-in with people. The folks that we hired over the spring for the summer had to know that they were coming in. The work was led by our special educators. These are classrooms that have 2, 3 support staff in it. And the idea was, what if we made the cohort smaller and get into our general education classroom? Not all of them, but I think we had 36 cohorts, but say 10 of those classes became our inclusion classrooms overnight. But it didn't happen overnight. It took a whole semester of studying and reading and understanding and getting on the same page with simple things like strategies to co-teach. What does it mean to parallel teach? What does it mean to station teach? Using the same language and the same strategies between teachers that are partnered. And at the middle school level, it's even harder because the co-teacher is like moving from school to school. So classroom to classroom. So there has to be additional time for planning. But this work, I think, is an example of me and my team and my co-administrator to really tackle a problem that teachers saw. And not all the parents were supportive. Some of the parents were saying, no, I want my student in this classroom. But to work and convince the parents that being in a least restrictive environment is more beneficial, not only to their students, but to all of our students in the school. But being able to establish a program that all of a sudden the district administrators would come and check it out and try to say, okay, we've been doing this, we try to do other schools, but in very small examples. how were you able to replicate it all at once? And it took time. We had our staff go through PD in the spring, and they were actually, they were using the strategies, and we were doing activities where, like, just one that sticks out to me, and it's not a great example, but they had this game where it was for students who had, it was basically like you're colorblind, right? And they would have all the words in different colors, but the word green would be written like red ink. And it was an activity where it's like we have to walk a mile in our kids' shoes to understand what we're experiencing right now is what this student is experiencing every day. We had a student with, it was hard for him to hold pencils. I can't remember exactly what was in his IEP, but we had to put tape all over our hands and then pick up pennies on a table. We couldn't do it as adults. But this is what the student was going through every single day. So those are two examples. But to actually plan it over time and for the entire staff, not just those 10 teachers, to be on the same page of saying this is what we're doing and why, and to convince the parents the same thing. The success in that is that it continued over into the high school I'd mentioned. I can't give you the exact numbers, and it's probably skewed, but in a school that had a typical class of 300, to have 90% of our students graduate, and I could probably, the thing is, the data that's kept in California, it's like if you don't test 50 kids, it's hard to like actually have accountability data. But if you imagine 90% of the staff, so 270 of the kids graduated, and we had 50 kids in the special ed program. So you can imagine there are it's probably not 90%, but a very strong percentage of students with IEPs who graduated.
Thank you. Our next question comes from our student representative, Syra Mercer. What are your thoughts about students playing a key role in their education, and how often would you like to meet with student leaders?
Students playing a key role in their education, I think that's like a tricky question because they are the key role in their education. And I'll answer the second question later, but as, and I keep on going back to this experience, and actually I'm using some of my experience as a middle and high school principal in our 7-12 expansion, right? Having the opportunity to enroll students 2 or 3 years before they hit 9th grade. Like 9th grade is, I always call it prime time. That's when the grades count, right? A lot of our students in 9th grade, they get there and they don't understand, like now we got Math Corps. We need to make sure that they know everything they're doing is going towards Math Corps. But if we can accelerate those conversations into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade prior to the point where they get there, the students can actually understand their path forward. Not only to graduation, but to other opportunities like early college and dual enrollment partnerships. But the reason why I said like the students' involvement as being just a given, if we as adults and leaders in our schools provide the students with the opportunity to learn and clearly understand their path forward to adulthood, basically, we are going to be in a better place. They are not 3rd graders, 2nd graders, 1st graders where they need our help for almost everything. These are young adults who need to understand what they are doing is going to lead to this success. One of the things that as we're rolling out Math Corps right now, at the time right before I left California, we were rolling out A through G graduation requirements, which was our version of Math Corps. And I think it was the policy passed in 2006, and the first graduating class was in 2017. So it was like a 10-year way to adjust school, high school course offerings, and basically it took a long time. We're doing it in 5 years, which is great. I think 10 years is a lot, but 5 years is great. But for the students to understand and to self-monitor and counsel themselves and actually be able to tell their parents who never graduated with Math Corps. I mean, I graduated from California high school and I didn't have to do A through G. But if my daughter said, Dad, this is what I have to do to graduate with Math Corps, and on top of that, be able to access AP classes and early college, she's telling me internalizing that, being in control of her whole pathway. So that's the student involvement that I like to see. We just boosted up the investments in high school counseling, academic counseling, specifically for our younger high school students. I would love to see a systematic approach to how counselors work towards we call it an individual graduation plan. I know we have it in our ICAP plan, but what would it look like if we did it district-wide in 7th and 8th grade for our 11 schools that have 7th and 8th grade, to have a 2-year conversation so when they start 9th grade, they're not going to say, wait, what? I have graduation requirements? As far as meeting with students, I'm in schools every single day. I'm at Charlestown High School and East Boston High School at least 4 days a week between the two of them. There's not a day that I go to school and only talk to adults. And students know me. We've been on, we've had 2 graduations, and I see the kids walking by, and I know where they're going to school, and I know what they're doing there next year. When you make yourself that accessible, and I know it's going to be different if I become the superintendent of the entire district, but finding a way to start my day on a high school campus, and by the way, there's like 40% of our schools in the entire district start at 7:30 or earlier. There's a way to start before the rest of the building starts to get and at least hang out with kids, be available and be accessible, not only through BSAC, but through, just the normal high school student that may not feel the urge to be part of the BSAC leadership. BSAC is another way to do it as well.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill will ask the next question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Welch, let me start off by saying thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for putting yourself forward in a national environment where less and less people are applying to be superintendents because the job is so incredibly difficult. Thank you for putting yourself forward in the work you do for Boston Public School students every day. You mentioned that many of us have toured schools with you over the years, including myself many times. Not only here, but what was the high school in LA that you founded?
So we took a tour for high school redesign to look at, we went to the LA High School for Arts. We went to the Hollywood STEM High School. We went to the Huntington Park School for Advanced Studies. But these are innovative schools. We were trying to look at models and bring them over here.
For high school redesign, there was a whole team from Boston that went. And
principals as well.
Yes, principals as well. And it was a very informative visit. So you obviously do a great job as an educator, as a teacher, as a school leader, as a network superintendent. And I thank you for all that, and it's clearly coming out in the questioning today. I want to turn to another part, though, of the role of superintendent that maybe isn't quite in your wheelhouse to date, so I want to understand more your philosophy about it. And that's obviously about fiscal resources. So Boston Public Schools, luckily, are in a fairly healthy position compared to other districts in the state and certainly large urban districts across the country, through the benefit of incredible support from the City of Boston, and thanks to Dr. Casilius for her working with 3 mayoral administrations to get $100 million in additional funding. We are, relatively speaking, in good shape. And obviously, much work has been done over the past years to correct for inequities in spending, from the weighted student funding, which you mentioned a moment ago is being looked at, where the funding is based on the student, to soft landings for schools facing changes in enrollments, to additional support for our most challenged schools. And we now have an unprecedented level of federal support, albeit for a short period of years, which creates opportunity and challenges. But even with these resources, we're consistently in a situation of having to make very difficult financial decisions and talking about with the parents and school communities, et cetera. So this has not been part of your background. So help us understand, please, your approach to fiscal management, because it is an important role for the superintendent, right? 10,000 employees, $1.3 billion budget. This is an important part of the job. So explain to us, please, how you will approach fiscal management, how you will make financial decisions, and how you center equity in your decision-making on fiscal matters. Equity. As a way of being specific, please also give us, please share with us how you approach any changes in the ESSER funding, the short-term funding, to not only make sure that funding is going to students, but also avoiding a fiscal cliff on spending decisions that this body would have to make very difficult decisions 2-3 years out if it's not done properly. And the third part to that answer, so the first is about your philosophical approach to fiscal and how you center equity in that. Second is about the ESSER funding. And then the third, I'd welcome any thoughts you want to share on how to get increased funding for the district beyond federal, state, and city funding. So from foundational support, private support, et cetera.
Thank you for the very simple question. So I will take this 3-part question in 3 parts. So first, the philosophy. All right, yes, I haven't managed a school district budget of $20 million, $30 million, $100 million, $1 billion, right? And I could go back to my experiences as a teacher becoming a principal and a principal becoming a regional school soup. These are all roles that were significant jumps in my leadership. I didn't do the traditional route, become an assistant principal for a couple of years. But at every single time that I was presented with an opportunity, I succeeded. Be it from an brand new elementary teacher to an accomplished national board certified teacher. Be it going from basically an instructional coach to managing a $10 million school budget. Be it going from a city that I basically lived in for the majority of my life, all the way across to Boston, and figuring out what it means to work with a network of 15 schools and how to support best. I was able to figure it out. I think that's just part of my DNA. And I know that as a superintendent, there are probably 10 other questions you could have asked outside of fiscal. It could have been operations. The superintendent is involved with all this, has to understand, but I need to really trust and believe that my team, who are financial experts, to help move the work forward. This is the type of we talked about relations and building trust and how I do that throughout my time. I need to do that with this team. I know this team, but I really need to do it from that perspective and that vantage point. And so, can I do it? I think I can. Going from right now, I think my biggest grant is like $1.2 million. $1.2 million to $1.3 billion. Yeah, let's do it, right? But in the approach to that $1.3 or $1.2 million grant that I'm working with right now, just like, and I'll bleed it into this ESSER funding question, federal grants, you got to spend it down to the penny. And if you don't spend it to the penny, they take it back, right? It's very similar to school budgets. I can always see Phil Brangiaforti in his office with his secretary every spring break because they're buying like 3 pieces of tape to get it down to 0, because that's the time where you spend down. I know the importance of that. This is the first time I had a big grant like that, but I asked for help. And we are spending every single dollar of that grant down, going directly to benefit the students through teacher stipends, primarily teacher stipends across the board. $1.2 million, it's going to be done. Maybe it'll be like at least single digits in the dollars, but that's the goal, because I don't want to give anything back. I actually want to go over. But thinking about ESSER, where we're at right now, we started with $435 million over a 3-year period, and I know it's phased, but I'm just kind of lumping it all together. From the last reports, we still have a very significant amount of money left, and I do see, from my vantage point, because all school superintendents we don't have a budget. We've requested access to it to work with our partners, but largely our involvement is working with our school leaders and their allocation. You mentioned like the fiscal responsibility and this cliff that's happening. I think the approach that I've taken in Region 1 with ESSER as the leader of 15 schools, some of them getting like $3 million over 3 years, right? And some getting much less money. But approaching it from the 1, 3, 5-year perspective, which our lead principal in our network always approaches the work with. What are we doing next year? What are we doing 3 years from now? What are we doing 5 years from now? When we got this opportunity in September, what are we doing with this money right now? Even though it didn't come for a little bit, how are we planning for the students who need it most, who are most impacted by the absence of basically being in school every day? The 3 years is what are we doing when that fiscal cliff comes? Because September 2024 is going to come, and if we are relying 100% on ESSER funding for extra positions, that's going to hurt you as a principal to say, you're not going to work with us next year. Think of it system-wide, how it's going to crumble. And we've done this, 10, 12 years ago, we had a big federal grant. And then 5 years, how are we going to ensure that the investments that we're putting in today are building the capacity of our teachers and our support staff so that when the money goes away, we are fine. We aren't buying people, we're investing in ourselves to ensure that in 2024, when me as a principal of a school with 40 teachers and I hire 2 teachers that year, I'm not retraining an entire staff. I just need to train those 2 teachers based off of everything we learned in the last 3 years. And so is it a concern that, yes, we have a lot of money, it's basically a 2-year investment. $300-something million is more than most districts get. I really appreciate seeing more people, because you need people. This is the FT. I don't want to hire more people, but in the case of actually executing the investment and the plans and the, even the transactional stuff, doing the paperwork to get these contracts processed, we need people to do it. Because I don't want to be the superintendent on the front page of the Globe saying, Superintendent Welch sent $100 million back to the federal government because he couldn't get his act together. And this accelerated timeline of 2 years, now, it's scary. And so it makes me think, number one, investing in a whole bunch of people is important to support our programs, but if the people are coming from our schools, we're creating more gaps in our schools. A lot of our talented teachers are applying for some really cool positions. We're having a hard time filling these teaching positions in their schools. And at the end of the day, we're in the business of teaching students in our schools, and I know the support is great, but we can't do it without teachers in our classrooms. So I need to really assess where we're at with, at one point last month, I think we were up to like 700 vacancies, and that's unacceptable. And I think this goes to my 90-day plan that I explained to you earlier. One of the first things is getting our schools as ready as possible for the start of the school year. Staffing is a huge issue for me. But thinking about what we need to do with the ESSER funds, and also coupling how we rebuild trust with the community, with our teachers, with our parents, with our students. I talk to my neighbors all the time, and I tell them about this great professional development I'm doing, and they don't get it. They don't see it, and it's awesome. My teachers love it, but to the regular dad, it's like, okay, great, you got this grant, and he's not seeing immediate benefit. I think to rebuild the trust and bring our folks back to believe we could do it, we need to do some of these hard investments, which is allowable under ESSER. I got a playground that's been demolished because it fell apart 6 months ago, 4 months ago. This is a school elementary school that doesn't have a playground. Like, let's give them what they need and make that community ecstatic over what maybe just a $1.5 million investment. But I bet you every single school leader, school community has an idea of what that marquee investment that they want for their school. And I guarantee you they're not $20 million investments. But actually getting the money in the hands of our principals and our school leaders, our school communities who know what their schools need, what their students need. Because at the end of the day, our ESSER investments were designed for the recovery of our students. And if it's not getting into the hands of the people who are going to implement, get that in with the help of central office, I think we're approaching the strategy a little differently. So that would be my response to the ESSER and the responsibility. And then the bring in additional sources. It's no secret that a lot of our foundational money has kind of dried up in the last couple of years. I don't think it's due to economics or whatever, but I feel like partnerships have been a little bit light in the last couple of years. I feel like my team has continued to benefit from relationships with foundations, with other philanthropic organizations, because I tell you what, and this is the question I answered earlier in the last session, when we bring in partnerships, it's almost like planning a lesson in class. We have to know the objectives, we have to know the outcomes we want, we have to know that what we're going to do, and it takes time to plan it out. A lot of partnerships come to schools and they get plopped on us and they just kind of fail. But if we are very thoughtful with the partners who are actually engaging with us, and one thing I learned in the last 7 years, some of these big foundations, yeah, they love giving money, but instead of giving $10,000 to 10 schools, they'd rather give $250,000 to 10 schools to do it together. And we've seen that with the 6th grade expansion in East Boston and Charlestown, planning grants that were offered for a team to do things together to amplify this experience for the entire region. Just last month, we got word of it's a smaller grant, $30,000. I know we're talking billions, but this is $30,000. It's really important for a school, right? This principal, she's in her 6th year. She's making relationships. She wrote this grant not for her school, but for the entire region. So the entire region is going to benefit from a strategy that we hope is going to reduce our chronic absenteeism. But she wrote the grant. It could have been hers. She wrote it for the entire team.
Thank you, Dr. Wells.
Thank you. The next question is for me. According to the BPS policy to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps approved by the Boston School Committee in 2016, the Opportunity Gaps Office is responsible for shepherding the district-wide implementation of the policy. How would you position and work with the OG office for maximum impact in deepening anti-racist consciousness and closing opportunity and achievement gaps for our most marginalized student populations, including students of color, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from low socioeconomic backgrounds? What experience and demonstrated success have you had in working with the district level office focused on closing gaps?
Thank you, Chair Robinson. I love this question. In the most recent DESE review of our district, they've called out several areas of our organization that needs help, and the help is not just for us as an organization, but it's actually to improve the outcomes for our students. English learners was called out in the report, and it was part of the MOU, and it was mentioned in the MOU of 2020, but indirectly, said we got to work on it. Special education and student services for students with disabilities was directly called out in 2020. And our transformation schools, which are our lowest performing schools, was called out in the 2020 MOU. The review also highlighted those three areas. And your question is about the Opportunity Gaps Office, the work that they've done. This office has expanded over the last several years. The work has expanded, their influence has expanded. We use the racial equity planning tool for all of our major decisions. The equity impact statement is the first part of our school committee presentations, and our team is great. Becky Schuster and her team reviewing these things, making sure that we are not missing any angles as we do these reports to ensure that we are doing our work in the name of equity for the students who need it most. And then transformation schools, I think I didn't mention that one, but these transformation schools, if you look at the 32 schools that are in, or 31 schools that are in a transformation network, they do have high concentrations of special ed students and English learners. And so if you think about those three big departments or three big areas of our district that were called out, they're not really separate, they're all together because there's overlap. And I would love to see the Opportunity Gaps Office and the entire staff with the work that they have been doing, introducing our school-based equity roundtables as a key decision structure, to work in collaboration with all three of these departments that we know are designed to support our most vulnerable students. As far as an example of me working in the name of equity to support our students and our ELs, our students with disabilities, students of color, low socioeconomic, the example that comes most clearly to mind and how I approach this could be with the Acceleration Academy initiative that we had this year. Now, this was a district-wide initiative. It was always part of that DESE grant that I got through the MOU. I knew it was coming. I didn't get the money until probably December. But one of the first things I did with our Deputy Chief of Academics when I met with him in last summer was, look, you're most likely going to do something really cool like Acceleration Academies, and we could do it through ESSER funding. But just know that I have $750,000 that was gifted to us to do the same thing. So I want to have the same strategies aligned with you. Just consider my region, whatever, figure out the math, let us be part of it. We'll do all that we can that's aligned with what you're doing, but just know this money is separate, or extra, not separate, extra. And so one of the big priorities that Dr. Eccleston put forward is we are going to focus on, I think the goal was like 75% of the invitees were students with disabilities or English learners. As we were planning for this Acceleration Academy, and because I was a regional school superintendent that had the grant tied to this network, this region, I took it upon myself to be very hands-on. When we took the beginning of the year formative assessments, I asked my team to look at their rosters, not just look at the formative assessments for growth, but also triangulate what they saw in the MCAS results, which may not have been the most precise measure, what they're seeing in the classrooms as students return to full in-person, to identify their rosters and their teachers to support all students that were English learners and students with disabilities. That work, I was happy to see in the classrooms. You may have seen, I only have Twitter, but you see my tweets. These classrooms were filled. I have about 7,000 students in my network. Over approximately 800, just a shade under 800 participated in the February Academy as well as the April Academy. All the students in the February Academy, we asked the teachers to develop a student intervention plan on our panorama system to actually track to see, because one of my things, and I forgot to mention this in my ESSER response, we can't just invest in stuff. We got to make sure that we're getting a return on our investment. So to be able to track the students that were selected that we saw on the lower performing based off of the first initial assessments, to invite them in and give them these 8 extra days of learning I want, like, eventually we're going to see when this end of year data comes out, I'll be able to track all the students that participated to see if it actually worked. And if it did work, we can amplify it for the next year.
Great, thank you very much. So that concludes our first round. You're halfway there. Have a quick sip of water and we will begin again. And I'll go back over here to you, Dr. Hawkins.
Thank you for your responses thus far. I'll start with just providing a little bit of context. So when we talk about the concepts of equity and what they're meant to do, we often talk about dismantling systems, which require top-down, bottom-up approaches, and we talk about disrupting patterns of inequity. The other piece is broadening participation and inclusivity approaches. Now, inclusivity has a temporal component to that, right? It matters how and when you are choosing to include in those discussions. And so along those lines, we know that rebuilding trust, particularly with BPS in the community, is very essential. Encouraging transparency between the community, this body, having trust in BPS, and even all the way up to the city of Boston and the mayor's office. And this incorporates approaches that will encourage respectful dialogue, where we're acknowledging and being mindful of cultural values and knowledge that of the community that is highly regarded and should be included at the forefront of our decisions, not necessarily as an add-on, which is often what happens. Families are often told things, and there's a sense that they haven't been spoken to or included within the beginning parts of the process. So knowing the high history of turnover we've had in the district, that mounting level of distrust, how do you propose to navigate the history of BPS and sort of bring that savviness that allows us to rebuild trust across all of these bodies?
That's a really, really good question, Dr. Hawkins. I'm trying to place that question in the context of some of the work that I've done. That may be the best starting point because it is a very, very complex question. I think that we are in the business of dismantling some of the systems that have perpetuated generational inequities. And I think that, there's been some great examples from this body making bold moves. And I mentioned in my definition of equity, the commitment to do things. When it may seem dangerous for you to do that. But I think your question is getting into including the voices, how trust and relationships play into this to actually get through something that's challenging, understanding the historical perspectives of what may be in whatever situation it is. I'm thinking right now also about some of the challenging conversations we're having right now with merging schools. And, I know this winter we, chopped off 7th and 8th grade and put them into this very disruptive things. It's really well intended. It's going to be aligned to our overall strategy. But the timing of it and the including of the voices is what you heard all the time. It's like, I'm a parent here. I didn't know. I wasn't included. I think that, and I go back, going back to the communication and the timing of the communication, I think bad news is bad news, but if you give people time to actually digest it and grieve and understand why we're doing this, it'll help us get to the ultimate goal that we want. Another element of it that I would like to overlay, at least from my perspective, last year we closed a school in my region. It was the Edwards Middle School. And it's, people in the community say it was the quietest school closing in the history of school closing. I still remember when we closed West Roxbury Educational Complex. That was a noisy closing, right? What were the differences between the Edwards and West Roxbury Education Complex? The Edwards was closed over time, right? The staff knew. I was encouraging staff to go to my other schools as the enrollment was going down. They still got their funding and the sustainability allocations because it was an investment to support the students, but also we have to weigh like the cost benefit analysis. Are we gonna overfund a school to get it through this very challenging time to eventually what we want 3, 4, 5 years down the line, right? So we have to be careful and understand what that means from a cost benefit analysis. The other thing that I would just like to raise, and I've only been in East Boston as a resident, as a member of the community for 7 years, and I don't have the historical perspective as some of our local electeds, like Sal Matina, who's now retired, was semi-retired, or Elsa Flores, who is basically she is the go-to mom in East Boston. If you want to mobilize 1,000 parents, you go talk to her. And knowing these people and who they are and where they are, but also working with one person in a community to deal with these difficult challenges. So in this case, I'm bringing up East Boston, working with Elsa, working with some of the local electeds. I'm the only regional school superintendent in that area. And we're talking about some of the challenging mergers that are coming up, or even switching from 7th and 8th grade from a K-8 to a high school. A lot of these complex decisions that should be unfolding over time, they involve 2 of me's, or 3 of me's, or 4 of me's, right? Which also complicates things, because if I'm a parent in a neighborhood that's getting, disrupted, I don't know exactly who to yell at. And in the Edwards case, everyone knew that they were gonna come catch me on the street and give me an earful. I was their guy. But it's not just the person like me, the school superintendent like me in the area. It's the operational team behind it. It's the other support staff. So just imagine if you have 4 teams working on one small project, that could be like 12 people, all kind of duplicative. So I think that giving time to have the conversations, mapping out what it would look like, bringing in people who have the historical knowledge and are aware of the landmines and the opportunities that would actually kind of mitigate and calm down some of the angry voices, but letting people know in advance, right? If I'm a parent who's getting ready to enroll a school in K-1 and they told me 2 years ago that school is going to close, I might not select that school. And so I think that's part of the communication, but if we can execute, it's all about execution and implementation. If we can execute it, that's the only way we're going to build the trust, and that's the only way we're going to move the school district forward, because I understand we're going to have some challenging years of decisions moving forward.
Ms. Opera?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that response. It touches some of a part of one of my questions, so I'll start there. Mr. O'Neill had mentioned earlier about being currently in a fiscal position where we are being able to provide soft landings for school communities that have experienced enrollment decline. We have seen a continuous trend in enrollment decline, and this is the curveball question that I know that families in schools and school committee members often don't want to talk about, because it can mean school disruption. It can mean school closures or mergers. But we are also, we walked around schools. My kids are in schools, your kids are in schools. We know the state of our facilities, right? And the need for upgrades and improvements. And as I mentioned last night, if we were to build a replacement school each year, it would take us a century plus to renovate or create all new school buildings. So would really like to hear a little bit more about the strategies that you would deploy in thinking about distributing resources. Again, keeping in mind the trend around enrollment decline, the real fear and understanding the disruption that it can cause for families and for staff around school closures and mergers, and also just thinking about the financial piece with soft landings.
Yep. Yeah, so that's the question that I think has been the end of many superintendency runs or candidacy runs. But I love how you said school disruption instead of cerrar, right? So let's keep it at that. I think it goes back to what I was mentioning, as you said, with Dr. Hawkins, the long-term planning aspect of it. There's got to be a world where we work with our fiscal specialists and also our city planners. I'm an educator. I went to school to be an educator. I got a master's in education, got a doctor's in education. I wish I had a master's in urban school planning, right? I know Mayor Wu through the Green New Deal is hiring more people on this team who are going to be experts in this type of thing. I would love to be a consultant based on my experiences growing new schools, being a co-located school leader, closing a school in Charlestown, and reopening it as a reinvented space for 2 school communities. But I think we need to rely on the experts. With that being said, I mentioned a little bit earlier this cost-benefit analysis. Like with the Edwards, for example, we were giving them a pretty hefty soft landing not to disrupt the experience of the students, knowing that it was already announced. And families were fine to continue sending their kids to that school because they knew the timeline and they knew that the program was going to transition to a 7-12 high school. But that cost $600,000, I think it was the soft landing that year. We have to measure what we're going to be giving to ensure a smooth, safe environment supported for the students. We had to do extra staff because it was smaller, rather than, weighing what would cost us to repair the damages and actually go through a long process of fighting with parents about where they would go. I think that it's not just saying we're throwing money at the problem, but I think that having a longer term perspective, if we're going to close a K-8, for example, what does it look like to stop enrolling in Kinder 1, Kinder 2 slowly? And eventually we clear with the parents, here are your options. The new school that's coming in is going to have these beautiful auditoriums. You can choose to go there. And I know families have multiple siblings, but being able to clearly explain what that is, I think that is something that is part of the soft landing. It is difficult. And I know that a school district that has lost 7,000 students in the last 10 years is going to go through transfer. We're not the only school district that is going through these changes. There's some examples in Los Angeles, in DC, in Chicago. We should actually meet with those teams who've done that type of work, not just the closure aspect of it, but the engagement aspect of it. School districts have been around for hundreds of years. In this case, 300 years, right? 370 years? It's nothing new. We were not the same district that we are today than we were 100 years ago. And so this conversation is kind of like deja vu, but I want to make sure that we are as proactive as possible so the parents understand what the options are and what the end outcome is in what year.
Thank you for that. And I see the timer and I still have time.
All right, let's go.
So BPS, Boston Public Schools, alternative schools, are offering educational environments for some of our most vulnerable students. What work have you done with this population? What outcomes have you seen as impacts of these types of supports? And what data can you point to highlight systemic improvement for overage and undercredited students? And what do you think is needed to strengthen our current programming here at BPS?
Okay, so I already mentioned my direct experience in the classroom at school sites running it in Los Angeles, but here, in my 4th year with Boston Public Schools, Superintendent Perel asked me to take on the high school region that had all of the alternative education schools and programs. I've never led in this matter before, but I knew using the EY, the Ernst & Young Parthenon report of off-track youth to guide our work to say, how are we serving the students that are identified in this population, in our school district that are not making the cut as far as in our traditional high schools? I think at the time we had 1,200 students, and a lot of our alternative education programs were serving all of the different categories that were highlighted in the report. The old and far from graduation students, the old and close to graduation students, the young and far students. It is hard to run very small schools effectively if you're trying to do everything. And so what I did with this team through our PLC meetings, I met with them every single month. They all came to the table to discuss and look at data together based off of this report to see where they're at. And not only to look at where they're at right now, we ran a data set to say, here are our students that are currently in 6th grade who are overaged. And not under credit because they don't have credit yet, but these kids that are they're almost a year overage, or some cases over a year overage. Eventually these overage students are gonna land into high school, And there's a pretty good correlation for the students that were in this in the past. They're going to be in the present. We're going to be in the past in our shoes. So thinking about how we design programs to work in partnership and not in competition with each other is something that I think we brought to the table in alternative education. I know we had a working group, which I led with several of the school principals who were, very experienced, Ben Halfat, Allison Ramish, to help guide this new version of what we're doing with alternative education. I think that it's stalled a little bit, but I think that bringing those teams back together and seeing how they fit in the new high school department, elevating the work of Manny Allen in the Re-Engagement Center, which, he and I have worked very closely even beyond my time leaving the high school team, but really elevating their work, knowing that we are probably going to have more than 1,200 students that are going to be in alternative education with the amount of students who are missing out based off of everything that happened during the twin pandemic.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Ms. Polanco Garcia?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Boston cuenta con magníficos maestros y desafortunadamente muchos de estos maestros están saliendo de Boston. ¿Cómo abordaría el reclutamiento, la concesión de licencia y retención de profesores y personal que sea completamente, que hablen los dos idiomas? ¿Cuál ha sido algún éxito que pueda mostrarnos hoy y qué retos superaste?
Boston has wonderful teachers that have left the district. So knowing that, how have you approached the recruitment, licensing, and retention of faculty and staff who are competent to teach in at least 2 languages? What have been some successes? What challenges did you overcome?
Bueno, ese es un gran problema para nosotros y ese no es un problema solamente para este año. Yo creo que en los próximos años van a seguir este problema. En toda la nación mismo está pasando. Pero a mí, las estrategias para mantener nuestros maestros que están exitosos es siempre cuando yo estoy en los edificios, por ejemplo, de humanas, esa es mi escuela dual language, de 2 idiomas. Siempre estoy hablando con los maestros y una de mis preguntas, típicamente una vez cada mes, ¿qué quieres hacer en 2 años, 3 años, 4 años? Yo conozco a mis maestros en este edificio, hay como 100 maestros en este edificio, pero yo pregunto a los maestros qué quieren hacer en su carrera y si quieren una posición como subdirector para apoyar a los maestros, si en oportunidad llegan, yo voy a invitar, hey, ¿por qué no está aplicando por este? So, esta es una manera para mantener nuestros buenos maestros, porque es una oportunidad diferente y muchos de los maestros no solamente piensan que yo estoy maestro y no piensan en otras oportunidades afuera de la clase para apoyar más maestros. Esto está pasando este año en Humana. Uno de nuestros entrenadores muy bien está saliendo en otra escuela porque está empezando un programa de masters. Y busquemos para un maestro muy buena maestra en la clase de primer grado, se llama Rosa Esparza. Ella está subiendo en esta posición para apoyar la escuela. So, es como un programa de crecimiento en la escuela. Un otro ejemplo de esta escuela es el ejemplo más cerca a mí. El equipo aquí en el bowling building, edificio bowling, está trabajando muy bien para traer más maestros a nuestro sistema, nuestro distrito escolar. Pero hay estrategias que están pasando en nuestras escuelas. Las 2 escuelas que yo estoy pensando, la Otis School en East Boston y también la Humana. Los maestros, los directores en esas escuelas están creciendo su equipo en la comunidad. Hay muchos ejemplos, como 2 este año, hay 2 miembros de la comunidad que empiezan como paraprofessional, suben hasta substitute building sub, y este año los 2 son el primer año como maestros. Es como un programa de crecimiento en la escuela, pero es específicamente para los maestros que hablan español y toma muchos años, pero estamos trabajando con el equipo en la comunidad para ayudar a nuestros estudiantes y los clases que están vacíos. What I said, I think, let me see. Going back to, I think the first strategy was like, what am I doing to maintain the talented teachers that are in a district, knowing that so many people are leaving? I'd mentioned that it's an issue it's not happening just with Boston, it's all over the country. I talk to people. I'm seeing it right now as a person trying to hire a principal. There's like very few candidates out there. But there are some things we have in control, like understanding and knowing what our teachers want to do. Like some of our teachers, I met a teacher, like my uncle. My uncle was a teacher for 40 years. He just wanted to be a teacher. He loved teaching. But then there's some teachers who get their administrative credential, but they don't really use it. And you ask them, like this one teacher I mentioned in the story with her name's Rosa. I always ask her, what do you want to do in 2-3 years? Like, how can I help you get there? This was the year because one of our really good transformation coaches went to another school because she got accepted to a program. In this case, Rosa's known, I've been talking to her for a while. I said, hey, this is your opportunity. Why don't you try it? But if we had been talking about it for a while, it may have not been a realistic jump for her. And she's going to be great, right? But I think providing opportunities for our teachers is a way to maintain the people in our system. We want them to stay in the family. I also see it, teachers transfer from one school to the other, but in getting promoted, but still staying within our team. The last part of it was examples of how we've worked on recruiting new teachers. And I shared two, we're doing an amazing job here in the bowling building. It's not really looking like it. And one of the questions I got earlier is like, hey, the percentages don't look that great as far as we're not growing, bringing in more teachers of color. But you see what our early cadet programs, like 3-4 years ago, there was only 10 students in the program. Now there's like 50. Like we're not going to benefit from those teachers tomorrow. We're going to benefit from those future teachers in 5 years from now. So it's going to be great, but we got to make sure we continue to grow that so we can address the issues that we're predicting in the future. But I highlighted 2 schools, the Otis and the Humana, who do a really good job of having those conversations with their community members, identifying, in this case, bilingual community members who eventually become a paraprofessional. The very typical next step is to become a cluster sub, and then eventually the teacher. It's happening in our schools. It's happening over here. We could do it if we could put our heads together and make it more systemic, but that's how we would retain and grow our own.
Thank you. Mr. Tran?
Thank you. Simple question. If you are if you are hired as the next superintendent, what will be the first 3 priorities that you will undertake? For in your first 3 months or so. That's the question.
That's the question. The first one's easy. Our schools need to be fully staffed, and not just with teachers. We have a couple of principal vacancies that popped up very recently. Our schools can't function without leadership, and the shifts that are happening, even with our assistant principal type, coaches, we need to make sure these teams are fully staffed. This is still my first one. Making sure schools are ready, not for September 8th, which is 70 days after July 1st, but maybe by August 31st, because we want to make sure that people are in the buildings, professional development is done, summer projects, which technically haven't started. These projects, these facilities projects, even be it floors or a massive project like converting part of the East Boston High School into 4 classrooms. It's starting. We met with the team yesterday. But that paint cannot be still wet on September 9th or 7th. The walls have to be done. Teachers have to be allowed to come in their classrooms to make those classrooms their own. And so part of the first priority, Mr. Tran, is making sure that our schools are set. We have to be ready for the first day of school. And there's a lot that goes into it. I would say a second significant priority would be what we talked about earlier. This ESSER timeline is ticking. And I've been in a situation before where, you know, maybe some money got kicked back from my school budget and it's like, we have to spend $20,000 in the next week or else the money's gonna go away. That's just $20,000 to meet a supply deadline or something like that, you know? But this clock is ticking, and I wish I had like a little tracker like the Domino's pizza thing that says like, the time is ticking, how much money have you spent, right? These projects, these proposals, these initiatives, not only do they have to be started, they have to be implemented, and the money has to be spent. I said it before, I don't want to be the superintendent that's on the front page of the Globe returning $100 million or whatever it is, 5 cents. I don't want to return 5 cents. But we have to make sure that this is, we can't possibly spend $200 million in the last 2 months of 2024. There's no way we can, all right? And so getting with the team, understanding where we are right now, how we can make it more efficient, understanding what structures we have in place, infrastructure to actually get these projects, number one, proposed, approved, and then started. And then the last one I think that would be really important for me as an incoming superintendent is, I know all the players, right? I'm gonna start on July 1st. I don't need to do a big tour. I eventually will get to those schools that I need to. I need to talk to the newly hired principals to start building that relationship with them. But in coming back to my team, the central office team, I need to make sure that the people at my small table are the people that I trust, the people who not only I know understand how to work with me, but I entrust the work in them that they will get it done. Because there is so much work to be done, and there can't be time wasted. And I know I'm going to be starting with a very, very tight senior team, and we are going to plan these first couple days, knowing that there's probably a lot coming down the pipeline in this new announcement that just came out today, which I haven't even read because I've been doing this stuff. But understanding the relationship with what we need to do with this Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and how it fits into what departments, what work we're going to elevate for the next 5 years to get the job done for our students and our families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question I'll be reading on behalf of Brandon Cardet Hernandez. Bullying, and to put it more bluntly, sexual, verbal, and physical harassment have been plaguing our system. Students with disabilities and LGBTQ+ students, real or perceived, are experiencing this harassment and harm in record numbers. Our system at times is struggling to report, respond, and cultivate safety for some of our most vulnerable kids. What is your strategy for strengthening school culture, building and rebuilding trust with families, and acting faster? Equally, there are school-level issues, but there are valid concerns about central oversight. In your response, can you talk about the work on the school level, but connected to the responsibility, infrastructure needs, and accountability at the top?
Okay. So for the first part, looking at the aspect of bullying, especially with our LGBTQ+ students, I believe that all students should feel safe in our schools. We do have team members in the Office of Equity who are specifically hired to work through these cases, especially if they're bullying that's sexual in nature. But in many cases, some of these are not reported in a timely fashion, and I think that we need to reset our expectations for our school leaders to understand who does what, where does what, and what does what and when. There's been so many cases where a principal will call me, and I could tell it's like an emergency 911 call, and the first thing I say is, call Equity, they'll walk you through it. We have experts who do this on a daily basis for us, but not all of our school leaders and our school communities are using them. Our Succeed Boston is a 24-hour service, a 24-hour hotline, right? I don't know if that is widely spread and everybody knows those resources that are available. So to the timeliness, we can't act if we don't know and we don't report. And if it's questionable, call the office. our school leaders may not be an expert in it, but there will be someone to say, no, that's not this, you need to do X, Y, and Z, versus we got it from here. We have these resources in the office for a reason. We are not tapping into it the way we should as an entire district, as what's unfolded over the last couple months. But I think it's not the fault of anybody in particular, other than we need to get the word out. It's almost like having an org chart and a job description and everybody understands what exactly everybody does, right? Maybe it's because the last couple of years we've been siloed in these little Zoom boxes, and I used to love coming to the office and running up and down the bowling building and just having meetings in person, because that's the way I got work done. I think maybe some of this information is not getting out because we don't have the opportunity. It's hard to have conversations in Zoom when you're like taking turns talking. As far as the school leader issues, can you repeat that last part of the question?
Talk about the work at the school level, but connected to the responsibility, infrastructure needs, and accountability at the top.
Yeah, so the accountability aspect is easy. If students are being reported and there's no follow-up, like that is something very simple that someone like me as a school superintendent can engage with the principal, the school leader, and say, hey, what happened, right? But it goes back to what I said earlier. It's hard for us as a system to address it immediately if it is not immediately reported. So I think that just going back to our policies, and I know like there's a structure in place where we have to read all the, a slew of school superintendent circulars, which are school policies at the beginning of the year, but not just like read it, check it off, like actually understand what it is. And if we have a person who's there to do this, how come all our school leaders are not accessing this resource?
Thank you. And this question will be on behalf of Ms. Mercer. How will you support student leadership, or to be more specific, the Boston Student Advisory Council, BSAC? And what steps would you take after students have protested or are protesting?
That's good. Thank you, Zara. I can't remember if it was the budget season of 2016 or 17, I think it was 17, when the students walked out. And I vividly remember you, Mr. O'Neill, walking along the government center area. I think it was you, me, Sam Zapina, and maybe Norm Townsend walking with like 1,000 kids, just assuring their safety, just being there, being present. But there's nothing you can really do to stop 1,000 kids or 2,000 kids from walking out. I think the question is really looking at the proactive steps leading up to it. It's very rare that we have a walkout or a sit-in or a standout, whatever you want to call it, that's just like a surprise to us. Like the kids tell us, they work with our teachers, there's ways that we can actually understand where it's coming from, what the result is, what they want. I think that, BSAC as the kind of megaphone for all of our high school students, that would be a great start for having regular meetings with this team, not just me as a school leader, but other folks on my team to talk about what issues are bubbling up. And you probably heard me say several times during this time, how are we proactively addressing the problems? If the students have an issue, they through conversation, we could figure out exactly, it may still lead up to an action, and that's fine, just as long as we're doing it safe, just as long as there's more than 4 adults in that case present and helping out. But I think that the more valuable part of it is the coaching, the training that goes into it with their students. And there are a lot of universities in our area that have like programs that actually support students in amplifying their voice, strategies to be community organizers. I was part of One LA, which is a community organization in Los Angeles. We'd go to regular trainings, and in these trainings, there were tons of high school students, how to do it right, how to do it more effective, and how to get your point across. But I think that, just letting it go on without even asking where you're coming from, what can we do to help? Because some of the times, and I found in the city, some of the times people are yelling and screaming about issues that we've already solved. We just haven't spread the word that we solved it. I vividly remember, it had to be the same year that the Otis got the playground. There was another school community that got a playground. The playground was already approved, but there was like 10 public testimonies about how they wanted a playground. And it was great to see the activism, but somehow, some way, the message didn't get out. And the families from the Otis didn't protest or ask for a playground because they knew that they already got it. And so those little things, I think, could go a long way. in supporting our students. Am I trying to mute the voices of our students? No, I'm actually trying to elevate it, but elevate it to the tables right here and the tables on the 5th floor.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Welch, you know, one of the beauties of this operating as a board is we all bring expertise to the table, and we have overlapping interests as well. And so I want to build on an area you started with Ms. Lapero, because we both share an interest in our alternative education program. And I know you had just a brief period of overseeing that before your responsibilities changed. So it was, you didn't get a chance to complete, I think, the work that you had started on it. But that is, and thank you for calling out what I think is the national model at the Re-Enrollment Center.
Yeah.
And Manny Allen and the team do a fantastic job there, so thank you for that. But to me, it goes more to a philosophical question. And it is not just about having a robust alternative education program, which I think this whole table firmly believes we have to have educational opportunities for all of our students. But it's about what responsibility do we have to our students? Is it to get them to graduate, or is it to get them to succeed beyond that? And if so, what programs do you think makes sense to add? And is it dual enrollment programs? Is it certifications, you know, for jobs? And yes, I want to go there because it's important to hear your thoughts about Madison Park. So tell me how vocational technical builds into that as well.
Yep.
So first, more the philosophical about what responsibility do we have to our students? And then second, what are some steps beyond alternative ed that you think can help prepare our students to succeed in college or career or whatever choice they decide to make?
Yeah. I appreciate how those questions are kind of related, ending with the Madison Park piece. And it's interesting, these alt-ed, kind of the re-engagement center office, which is kind of the touch point, the enrollment office for, and the going out to get our students recovered. I know you and I, we've been on walks, going door knocking, things like that. But that is it's housed in the Madison Park building. It's also housed underneath our adult school program. And our adult school isn't technically classified as a school, it's classified in our system as a program. But I think just geographically, all these things being in the same building, they are part of the answer to this response. Philosophically, I believe we are responsible for our students up before graduation, before enrollment, during their 12 or 14 or 15 years, depending how lucky you are to get a K-0 seat, as well as beyond. I think that the connections to Boston Public Schools and the city of Boston will never stop at one point. And I think that the resources that we have, and it doesn't matter if you're as a young adult coming back, you know, asking for something as simple as a transcript or help with additional resources. Some of our young adults have come in and asked for, they've taken 2-3 years off and are asking, I need to get my GED. These are people that we should welcome with open arms because they are our kids, right? I mentioned the before school, and this is not the question, but we know where our students are coming from as soon as they're born, right? We need to do all we can to prepare them as they enter. But this question is about the other end. The responsibility is there. I really believe that the Madison Park building is being underused. I've been in school systems where school buildings are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 a.m. for the regular school day till 3, afternoon twilight programs, and then evening programs through the adult education office. I know that Madison Park is available for other high school students. They come in, there's an awesome welding program for our English language learners at Charlestown High School. I think 9 students come in, it's 2 days a week through the partnership with Kevin Mescaskell, going to broker these, basically bringing people in from who would have never experienced this before. But when I pass by Madison Park, I see the lights for the adult school program in the middle of the building, and it's relatively dark on the other side, yet we have all these beautiful facilities. One of the things I would love to explore is what programs would, you mentioned certification, just because you graduate, maybe you're looking for your GED, I think that we could also model what's happening with our adult school, which just had their graduation last Friday. It's one of the best graduations of the year. If you haven't been there, you got to go to adult school graduation next June. But how do we transition and share and partner some of the expertise that's happening in our adult school program with the building that's literally right next door. And some of their classrooms are in Madison Park Classroom because it's such a big program. What if a lot of our vocational tech educators, one of my neighbors, his dad used to be a carpentry teacher over there, Vic Fanuel, and he made a career transition to go into teaching, now he's doing carpentry again. But if you're looking for people who have the skills to teach students these very valuable vocational tech skills, maybe they're working during the day, and they would be completely open to doing an adult school type certification program after school, which may be tied to some of our alternative education, because you're talking about engaging people, bringing them in. If they did not get their high school diploma, but there is an incentive for them to learn a trade, we should build it for them, because maybe they're working during the day at some job that they don't want. And if we open up our building to give them the skills and the certification to start a brand new career, it's right there. We should be doing it.
And just as a follow-up to that, because it ties together, you're talking about adult education or programs available for the families, and it makes me think of the work going on at the Gardner Pilot School and at Burke about wraparound services, which the city would like to, community schools, we're calling it hub schools now. Please give me your thoughts on that, and is it of value, and does it help reduce inequities, and how, are you interested in expanding it?
Yeah, 100%. One of our schools, like through ESSER funds actually, I feel like this is the Humana show, but it's the Humana. They have a large ESSER investment. Their school is a 7:30 to 2:10 school, and we've always tried to find after-school programming for the students. We got an after-school coordinator whose hours is now, she's a managerial employee who works technically from 10 to 6, because we shifted her after school, but she's always there early, Gabriella Chu, who's really good. But extending the use of the building into 6 o'clock, and it goes beyond 6 o'clock because the Harborside ESL program is also there, which is an external program. We have their offices in there. But I think that the Humana has been designated as a hub school moving the future. We just got the hub coordinator, Liliana Arteaga. She's really great, living in East Boston, knows how to bring the resources in. But they informally started this structure very early on with the Harbor ESL program for the teacher, for the parents. The benefit is you got students and parents learning basically literacy skills, learning English in the case of the Harborside School. There's tremendous benefit from that. This is a program that staffs themselves. We're not paying for it. We're just opening up our doors. We have custodians working all night anyways. And it's a program that's been there for a while. During the pandemic, that was a key distribution center for our food in East Boston. And they did it, they just shifted. And so I think that, really excited. I say 7 to 10 o'clock, that's a little bit of a stretch, but imagine we have programming all the way until 10 o'clock, putting some of our adult school programs in partnership with the Harbors in that case to actually bring more opportunities for community members to benefit us all, because the long-term benefit, helping the parents, helping the students, I think it goes hand in hand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're almost out of time. We have a few things left, and I have my last question, so I'm going to ask this quickly. Understanding the big picture and the monitoring and management of daily operations within a school district are essential skills for an effective superintendent. With this understanding, how do you design a cohesive central office that delivers high-quality support and service to schools for equitable student outcomes?
How do we design the office that pushes towards equity for students? I think one of the biggest things I would do in my first steps, and I'm not a computer programmer, but I would find out somehow, some way to create a basic data dashboard of the big buckets of work in our system. It could be as simple as one metrics for transportation, one metrics for summer facilities projects. Like, how many summer facilities projects are on track for completion? That should be up in our face every single day, so you and I, all of you and I could talk about it, our school leaders could talk about it, the public could talk about it, to say we are moving the work forward, and that's just operation. I think we could also include elements of special ed compliance, EL compliance, hiring goals in this. But I think that to ensure the team is working, I think that data needs to be part of the conversation in everything we do. And if we see one of our operational teams knocking out the park, if transportation is 100% of the students dropped off 15 minutes before school every single day for 100 days in a row, we need to ask that team, how did you turn it around? Because I need that expertise in this other department, getting it moving in the right direction. I said before, one person cannot do this job alone, but I think that opening the conversation and understanding how we could all help each other do the job is a key aspect of this. And it's not just the internal, very complex dashboards that we have each department. It's what is the one thing to just start the conversation that we can move the work forward. Because I think that's about accountability, being able to talk about it. It shouldn't be something that's shared once a year. It should be something that's seen every single day. It's what we do with our teachers. It's what we do with our principals. We need to do it as a system to ensure that we're doing what we're doing to present the best product forward for our parents and our students.
Great. Thank you for that response. That concludes the end of this portion of the interview. We've covered a lot of territory today, and I want to thank you, Dr. Welch, for your thoughtful responses. Dr. Welch, in the last few minutes, now it is your turn to ask us probably a question. The floor is yours. Please take it away.
Okay, so let's build on that last question that I just talked about, data dashboards. I know one of the most significant roles of this team's job is to evaluate me as a leader of this school district, and therefore how our school district is doing, our entire team. The annual goals are great, right? I do annual goals. I actually do twice-a-year goals for my principals. Bringing what we do in the classrooms in our school buildings to this body right here. And it's not in the name of just showing you data all the time and annoying you with here's where we're going, let's talk about it. But we do need to talk about it. I think that it'll help elevate some of the initiatives, projects, reports that you need to hear about if you see things that are lagging. All my life, I've been someone that's been very responsive to feedback. As a teacher, you see the data every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right? As a principal, your feedback from your boss is, look, you're doing great in these 5 things, but these 2 you need to work on. I think our students, our schools, our school leaders, our families deserve to know how we're doing more frequently so we can adjust or actually set higher goals. Or if we set something too ambitious, try to figure out why it's not growing. And so my question to this team, and it could be anybody, how do you envision supporting a systems level leader like me who wants feedback on a regular basis? I'm not saying a weekly or monthly, but publicly putting me out there. How do you envision yourself pushing back on me to actually get the work done for our students in each and every one of our schools?
Want to talk about the evaluation process for a little bit and how it's different in year 1 versus the other years?
Go ahead.
So as you undoubtedly know, and I say this also because we have some newer members of this body as well, there is a formal evaluation system for the superintendent that is set up by DESE, and it is typically a different evaluation for year 1 of a superintendent versus future years. And so we'll be following that process, and it is setting a goal that has quarterly goals as well, and agreeing what would you be doing in year 1 versus future years, and evaluating on it, having open conversations with you about it. I would also say, though, that this body has adopted goals and values, and this body has adopted trying to remain as focused on student outcomes as much as possible versus adult inputs.
Yep.
So I think we would be very focused literally on what you talked about. So your 90-day plan of getting fully staffed, of the ESSER funding, of building relationships. I think we'd be very interested in how you build out your team, and does the team reflect the diversity of the district and that you have all the different voices at the table. I think that would be crucial for us to see. How you start to build trust and transparency across the district as well. How you prepare for the opening of school, how you work with DESE, on the issues that have been raised in the audit, and how I think there'd be great understanding of there's a difference of learning the role and starting in the role versus year 2, year 3. But the evaluation the first year would be different, and the goals in the first year would be different from future years. Does that make sense? Madam Chair, do you want to add more? Because you consistently provide feedback to the superintendent on pretty much a daily basis.
Yes, I think the other issue would be your communication with all of us. The committee, because of the way we have to work, we don't get a chance to come together except when we are at school committee meetings. But it is important that you keep us up to date on the things that are going on in the district, and so that members also can have open office hours with you. Superintendent Conselius has provided a time weekly that people can pick up the phone, call, et cetera, so that we can keep in touch with one another. And I think that is also helpful, and not surprising each other or being up to speed on anything that might come up that needs to take us in another direction or that you need different support on. So I think we really want to keep an open conversations and opportunities to go out with you, to visit schools, to understand what you are experiencing, so that helps us also to do the monitoring of student outcomes for us.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning the communication, even to the extent, when I was working in my 3rd year here as associate soup, I was involved with a lot of the school committee prep, and just seeing the amount of time, I see it as like planning a professional development for my school leaders. Like, it takes 3 weeks to do it right. So getting you the information as soon as possible so you could digest it, ask questions, push back. I don't know if that's the exact protocol, but I'm committed to that. That's part of communication. But to my earlier question, the feedback informally or formally on the phone is one thing, but I really want our team, organization, our parents, our students to understand where I am with, as Mr. O'Neill mentioned, with the student-related metrics.
Data.
And if they're just like we do with our teachers with formative assessments, right? Like, what happened here? This group of students dipped down. What did you do different? What are you going to do differently to move? That's what I was trying to get at, as far as how are you going to publicly hold me accountable as I work towards my end-of-the-year goals, the organization's end-of-the-year goals. So we're always on our toes moving forward. And I don't know what that looks like. You mentioned this quarterly reports. I would love to dig into it, but what can be shared so people know that we are working as hard as we can for the students of Boston Public Schools?
Well, with our goals and guardrails, we do have interim goals. And with the issues that are coming forward with DESE, there will be a lot of reporting.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that there is going to
Got
be
it.
a lot of reporting that's required, that's going to help shape what we do as part of our agendas. We're hoping as a body that in the next couple of weeks, that prior to, as we start with the new superintendent, that we'll sit down together for several reasons. One is to be able to look back at where we are with our goals and guardrails as we move forward with lots of new information, but also to set up a new way of communicating, a new way of thinking about how our board meetings are structured, what kind of information we're looking from the district, how do we communicate and talk with each other. So for us, it'll be a two-way street, and we would want to work with the new superintendent to say, okay, you need this from us, we need things from you. How can we create a structure together that works and keeps us all feeling that we are moving forward together, particularly for the students and on their outcomes.
Perfect. I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you. And so I will give you a moment to make some closing statements, and then we will
Yeah,
close
so
out for the evening.
I'll probably just paraphrase my opening statement. I mentioned if I am lucky enough to become the next school leader or school superintendent of Boston Public Schools, there'll be many firsts for Boston Public Schools, and we've done a lot of firsts, and I know Boston's really big about the first, but and I know we're gonna have to talk to Ms. Sullivan to help maybe do some research on this, but I'm almost 100% positive that there has not been a national board certified teacher leading this district. As far as I could tell, and I went back as far as I could, I don't know of any active parents. I know parents have been part of our school district, and that's something that I could bring and hopefully inspire others to do when I'm gone in 20 years. A bilingual educator, I know other folks spoke different languages, so but I just want to lift that up as something as a very important part, especially with Rafaela being on our team and understanding the barriers that our students are going through. Like I'm a Spanish language learner, but I try my best to communicate all that I can. I want to bring that to our Spanish-speaking community. But the main point that I want to bring to this is, aside from actually being on the ground in classrooms, leading elementary, teaching in elementary, leading in middle school, leading in high school, working in the classrooms in high school, alternative settings, teaching and managing school systems, and working with one of the largest regions in the state. If you think about it, the 77,000 is larger than the majority, almost nearly the 95%, that's my math, of districts in the state. I do have a lot of the characteristics that the community has called for, but I think the most important one is what Mayor Wu has been saying since the very beginning. She's looking for somebody who knows the system, who can hit the ground running. BPS has dramatically changed since I've been here, and I'm well aware of what our district brings every day, who our students are, who our parents are, who our teachers and who our principals are. I've been in and out of the central office through the last several years. I know how this team works. I know how to navigate the central office. And I've had experience working in City Hall with my year in 2017-18. But I think the most important thing that Mayor Wu said was we need to have someone to hit the ground running. And the end of this school year is Thursday, June 30th. The first day of next school year is July 1st. That's Friday, 1 week from now. I have my entire year open. No family vacations. I am ready to go. My wife and I, as soon as this started really heating up over the last week or so, we've come to the understanding that this is going to be hard for us as a family, but she is more than prepared to take this on. And I'm more than prepared to take Boston Public Schools on to the next level on July 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Welch.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Welch. I want to remind our audience that they can learn more about the candidates and view recordings of all of the panel discussions at bostonpublicsschools.org/SUPSearch, SUPT-SEARCH. People are encouraged to email feedback to superintendentsearch@bostonpublicsschools.org. The committee will take a final vote on June 29th at 5 p.m. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this public interview. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there unanimous consent?
Aye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
No.